Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to The Unspoken Truth. I'm your host, Robert Bruss, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ed Anderson, right there in Minnesota. We're live every day here on YouTube at 5:30 a.m. Sydney time and 2:30 p.m. Minnesota time. G'day, Ed. How are you, mate?
Same as always, Robbie.
Living the dream, mate?
Living the dream. How about you?
I'm really well. Also, you mentioned to me today that you wanted to do a show about climate change, and I could hear a collective sigh from the audience of people going, "Oh, why do we want to talk about this?" The collective, That the reality is, this is maybe one of the most important topics of our time, and not for the reason that you might be thinking, ladies and gentlemen. I want to dive straight in because there's a lot to cover here on the show today, and I believe that it's not called climate change, it's the big climate con. We need to put some proper vernacular around this and get our nomenclature right, because you're being conned, ladies and gentlemen. You're being conned because they want to actually control you. And we've got something to say about this today, and I'll show you exactly why this matters. You'll see just in 10 minutes of hanging out with us here today, and you know all of these things. And this is one of my favorite things about this particular topic, and I've spoken about this a lot publicly, is that you're not affected by deep state here. You're not affected by mainstream media, because you have the ability to go and do your own research, and you have your ability to make a discernment as to whether or not something is true or not, based on what scientific evidence is actually showing you. Now, there's no way for you to validate what the scientific evidence is of climate change, because you're not a scientist, you're an individual, but the collective consciousness of all people from one side giving you a message, and the collective consciousness of people on the other side giving you a message, will help you to make a decision about these things. This is a really, really important subject, folks, because it affects each and every one of us. There's only 4 or 5 things that affect everybody on planet Earth. 1 is an asteroid strike, 2 is a pandemic, 3 is a nuclear war, and number 4 is climate change. But if you remember, Ed, not that long ago, mate, it used to be called what? Not climate change, it used to be called, you remember?
Which one?
It's been stamped out of our lexicon, yeah?
Global warming, global cooling, global warming.
Yeah. Here, I'll give you 2 things that have been stamped out of our lexicon by deep state. The first one is, it used to be called Asia Pacific. It's now called Indian Pacific or Indo-Pacific, because we don't want the Chinese connotation of Asia Pacific. They don't dominate. It's the Indians that dominate. It's the Indo-Pacific. It used to be called global warming. Yeah, but it's no longer called global warming because there's no evidence of the world warming up. It's called climate change. So you'll see all of these things shifting and moving continuously in a narrative, in a mainstream narrative, to try and get you to comply with something. And I'll show you exactly what that something is. So let's dive into this topic here today. And I want to start with this graphic here. And this is all about 2 words, 1 plan: Corona and climate. And we saw the rollout of this ridiculous fake thing that happened in the last couple of years. The whole thing was fake. The whole thing was a ruse. It was a ruse to control you and to change the way that our world works. So Corona was meant to be an extinction level pandemic. Yeah. And it was the whole idea, the whole policy was to control you. Climate change is an extinction level event to control you as well. The probability of success is 0. The probability of Corona wiping out the world was 0. The probability of climate change wiping out the world is 0. And we all know from being in high school and just studying science and the weather and just living in the world that some days it's really hot and some days it's like really, really cold, and you get more polarity in that weather than most people in Minnesota. But here in Australia, it's pretty balanced. On a whole, it's a miracle. The where we live is a miracle. It's a miracle that we're actually here. But it's not some fragile thing. The implementation of the Corona stuff was all about lockdowns and mandates. And for climate change, it'll be about prohibition and taxes. The social effects are servitude and poverty. That's what happens from lockdowns and mandates. And the social effects of climate change are the same: servitude and poverty. Corona and climate change are one and the same thing. They're 2 sides of the same coin. The primary instrument to get you to comply with corona is to stick something up your nose, a PCR test, a test designed to actually not even test for something that actually doesn't exist. So that's actually ridiculous. The primary instrument of measurement that we have for climate change is CO2, and I'll debunk all of that bullshit for you in just like 2 seconds from the co-founder of Greenpeace, of all things. Greenpeace, the co-founder of Greenpeace, says that CO2 is not the measurement we should be using for climate change. Corona is all based on computer simulations and modeling. So let me ask you this, Ed. So I've been hogging it here on the front end. Have you ever seen a picture of coronavirus under a microscope? Have you ever seen that?
No.
You've only ever seen a graphic of a ball with spikes on it. I've never seen a picture of it. But whenever you see mainstream media talk about Ebola, yeah, have you seen that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. Have you ever seen chicken pox or scabies or some other thing under the microscope? Yeah, they show you that stuff all the time. But you've never, ever seen, never. I've never seen, and I've looked high and low. I've looked on all the conspiracy websites. I've looked in the dark web. I've looked everywhere. I've never seen ever under the microscope what it looks like. They've never shown that to me. And what they do is they use the PCR test to say that you've got it, but it's a test designed to find anything. And the amount of cycles that they use in that PCR test, we all know that the PCR test was not designed to test for coronavirus. We all know that. The government even knew that, yet they spent gazillions of dollars using PCR tests to try and test for something that the device was not used to test for. It doesn't make any sense. And the reason it doesn't make any sense is because the whole thing was fake. Wasn't real, the whole thing. And am I a climate denier? No, I live in the world. There's climate, there's weather, there's high pressure and low pressure systems, there's weather systems. I know more about the weather than most people can possibly ever hope to, because I'm a pilot. And pilots are subjected to the weather more than just about 99% of the population. And just about every decision that I make as a private pilot, as a VFR rated pilot, is based on the weather. So I have a deep understanding of this, not at a scientific level, but at a practical level. And I can understand what these people are talking about because I've taken the time to study this topic. Excuse me. Before we get going, I want to remind everybody that the government agency here in Australia called the CSIRO put out this graphic in 2013 showing that the fact that there was more CO2 in the atmosphere was a good thing and it was greening planet Earth. So I want you to take a look at this graphic for a minute here. On the left-hand side, the scale is 30% more greenery on planet Earth between 1982 and 2010. And the dark blue shows you that there's many places on planet Earth that have had a 30% increase in the greening, meaning the primary food of plants on planet Earth is carbon dioxide, and there's more carbon dioxide on planet Earth now, so therefore there's more plants on planet Earth now, and there's more trees and plants on planet Earth to sequester carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which makes the Earth greener, which means there's more oxygen in the atmosphere. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know it's an oversimplification. I get it. I completely get it. There's many more things that go into it than just that. But at its face value, the output of human emissions is not the problem that we need to look at. I believe as there's more and more people on planet Earth, the problem is not climate change. The problem is pollution. There's a difference between climate change and pollution. And you could argue, and I'll let you argue all day long, that the two things are not mutually exclusive. They're together, and they're one and the same thing. But the reality is I can't go down, when you think of Australia, Ed, you probably think of beautiful, pristine beaches and stuff. And there definitely is that. And when you go to beaches in Australia where they're inside of a bay or inside of a cove, you normally see really pristine beaches. But if you go to a beach that is coastal, meaning there's nothing in between that piece of sand and the actual ocean, like it's not an inlet, a river, or a beach or something like that, it's covered in plastic, man. And there's all sorts of rubbish. And it doesn't matter where you go. If you're in a national park, I can remember being on the most southern beach in all of Australia, at the bottom of Tasmania, walking along the beach there going, man, this was years ago. Like, this is like in the early 2000s, and just kind of been a bit disappointed at the plastic on the beach. Like, come on, man, this is not from people. This is not from people like on the beach. Nobody is sitting on this beach in 10 degrees and the water is from Antarctica swimming here on a summer's day. That's not what's happening here. The plastic that's on the beach here is washing up here. So I think that pollution is a very real thing. And the destruction that humanity wreaks on planet Earth because of pollution is horrendous. And climate change looks to address a lot of those issues collectively, but I also think that they miss the mark in saying that pollution is the cause of climate change. I don't think that that is actually the case. I don't think you can join those dots and bring those two things together. Let me bring you in here, Ed. What are your thoughts on what my comments are here so far?
Yeah, well, those are two completely distinct issues. Yes, they will try to, on occasion, combine them, because it's all about creating sympathy for their cause, right? Nobody wants pollution. I do know about, so apparently there is a little area in the Pacific there where the currents kind of like go circular and it's like a big whirlpool of plastic bottles and crap that just kind of sits in that and just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And most of it, of course, is coming from China. China is famous for dumping barges full of garbage into the ocean. And so I'm sure that a lot of that plastic, if you look at the bottles, probably see Chinese writing on them. That'd be my guess.
Most of that stuff that's been proven is actually fishing equipment. It's all the nets and all the fishing gear that goes over the side and doesn't get recovered. I can remember, so I was in the Navy. I joined the Navy in 1994. And I remember in 1997, we were in Indonesia. And we're in a place called Surabaya in Indonesia. And when you come alongside in a warship, everybody goes ashore except for a small party called duty watch. And duty watch are the people that stay on the warship, and there's usually probably about 20 of you that stay on the ship, and we look after the mess, we tidy up, and we make sure if there's a fire party here to actually go and put the fire out, or if there's a flood or something goes wrong, right? So it's kind of like a security detail. You can't leave something like a ship by itself. You need to have people there, right? So I remember we came alongside in Surabaya, and I was duty, and I hear this fire alarm going off, and then I thought, oh, that's an exercise. And they came over the 1MC microphone and said, belay that. This is not an exercise. And they played the anti-collision alarm. And they play the anti-collision alarm when you're at sea, like there's something's going to collect you. And you're like, what? And so I'm running outside, and I get outside. And as I come outside, there's this ferry that's on fire coming towards our ship. And we're all like grabbing the hoses and the fire hoses, and we're turning the fire hoses on this ferry that's on fire. Anyway, just before it comes near us, probably, I don't know, it must have been about 20 or 30 meters, a tug comes in between both of us and grabs the ferry and moves it away, and we're kind of hosing with the fire hose, and we're ready if something happens, if it collides with us, right? So they'd lost steering, there was a fire, it moved away. And I was like, man, oh man, that's the most that's ever happened on duty watch in all this time. Because normally nothing happens, right?
Yeah.
And I remember after that had all finished, and that's the reason I remember this actual incident, right? Because there was that ferry that was on fire. And I remember going to the other side of the ship, so the wharf side. And it was the end of the day, and this was a really busy ferry terminal in Indonesia, and where Surabaya is located, there's people coming and going all the time. And Indonesia is a very populated place. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of comings and goings. And to the tune of probably, I don't know, 5,000 or 10,000 people in the afternoon that we were there. It was a lot of people. And everyone had left because the ferries had finished for the day because the sun's going down and it's afternoon. And there's a bunch of people on the wharf cleaning up. And they've got these brooms. So they're like a party of people, maybe probably 5 or 6 people wide along the wharf. And they're pushing down the wharf and pushing all the rubbish into one big pile. Yeah. And there's another bunch of people from the other end of the wharf moving up, sweeping. And then there's some people that come from the sides, and they sweep it all into one big giant pile. And the pile, honestly, it looks like a bonfire of rubbish, of thongs, flip-flops, not thongs, flip-flops, and of rubbish and just stuff from so many people being here. It's like these people get off the boat because there's no garbage bins or anything like that. Whatever rubbish they've got, they just huck it on the ground. And so there's this big bonfire size of rubbish there. And all of the people that were sweeping from both ends now go to the other side, and now they start sweeping this giant pile of rubbish into the water. And I was like, they're cleaning up. At first, I'm like, wow, they're cleaning up the wharf. They're tidying it all up. And then there's this big giant pile of it, and then they face the water, and then all 10 of them are like pushing it all into the water. And I thought to myself, I have to go in there tomorrow. Because I was a ship's diver, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we should have put the grates on the ship this afternoon when we got in. I never ended up going in the water there, thank God. It was like horrendous. But just the scale of, you think of 4 or 5 skip bins of rubbish that you would have, like a front loaded truck comes along and picks up that bin and tips it into the back of the vehicle. It's like 4 or 5 of them, they just swept it all into the water. And I thought to myself, this must happen every day. No wonder this place is like so filthy. Why can't the government have some sort of waste disposal or some sort of tip or some way of doing that? But then when you go down that path in your mind, you think Indonesia's not a very big place. It's very small. Where would they put that? How would that be? So no wonder they throw it all in the water.
But it is one of the most populous countries on earth.
It is. Yeah.
They have like 5 times the population of Australia, and it's a fraction of the size of Australia.
It's tiny. Yeah.
So
absolutely. Have you got a report for us, Ed? I can see a little video in there. Why don't we play that and have a check?
It's pretty self-explanatory. There was an event that took place in Paris last week, and I took the time to wade through all the videos on it and do all the research on it, so you don't have to. Oh man, do yourself a favor. Don't. I mean, I cover all the important stuff. All right, so let's get to it. Okay, so a few days ago, an event was held in Paris, and it was attended by many, many world leaders, including Janet Yellen. And on the agenda was a new global finance system. And in the process, they exposed their true intention. They exposed the scam of climate change and the hypocrisy of the large industrial countries toward the development countries. All right, so let's talk about it. Okay, so the focus of this event in Paris was the creation of a new global financial pact with a focus on developing the issues of poverty, not really, and climate change.
At the financial summit taking place in Paris, world leaders are asking how a new financial system can be established and what it might look like so that poverty and climate change can be combated in developing countries.
And in this episode, I'm going to show you how this is all a scam. This is all a money grab at the expense of these poor countries. Now, this new global financial structure is meant to cover the next 18 to 24 months. And essentially what they're trying to do is pool money together so they can more easily finance their pet projects related to the development of clean energy.
Ability for countries to face the challenge, to adapt to the challenge of climate change. And because of that, I want to announce today, we are lifting up our ambition to increase by 50% the Resilience and Sustainability Trust.
Okay, in theory, that sounds really good, but that's not the real agenda. Those are the headlines, the talking points that they put out for public consumption. But if you look at this program in its whole, it is pretty evil. So here's the hypocrisy that was revealed. While these developed countries talk about all their generosity and how they want to look out for the poor, they still refuse to absorb, in other words, forgive, a lot of the bad debt that these poor countries cannot afford to keep up payments on. So in a sense, they're saying, all right, we're happy to give you more money as long as you use most of it for our green initiatives. And the poor countries are saying, listen, we can't keep up with the payments on our existing loans. I mean, these poor countries are already stuck because they do need more money to keep up with those payments. That's what they want to get the loan primarily for, is to keep up with their payments on their bad debt. But these developed countries are saying, nope, we still expect you to make your payments on those old loans. And yeah, we'll give you some new loans if you want. We'll give you more money if you want, with some very ugly restrictions. This is how the West controls the developed countries. You got to give China credit. They actually said to the meeting, listen, if you really want to help these poor countries out, why don't you forgive some of these loans? And the leaders at the developed countries say, I don't think so. But we do want to help those poor people. Okay, so they're evil and they're hypocrites. This is all about money. This is about control. This is about keeping poor countries under their thumb. They don't want to give these poor countries a chance to get ahead. The developed countries, they're willing to come up with new loans to help out these old countries, but they're not going to forgive the old loans. So again, let's drive that home. Okay, these poor countries who are struggling to make their payments on the previous loans from the World Bank and the IMF, They cannot feed their own people. So they ask for relief to help with things like providing food and healthcare and education to their people. But as they go to these developed nations, as they go back to the World Bank and the IMF, they are sticking to their gun. They're not, we fully expect you to keep up with your payments. I mean, the World Bank has said, no, we're not going to work with you to restructure your loans, maybe even lower your interest rates. No, we won't do it. But you won't hear that discussed in the open at these breakout sessions at this event in Paris. But when you're in the position as a lender, you're in a position of power. The poor people can't argue with you. They have to accept whatever onerous terms you put on them. So in my opinion, these elitists in Paris, these are slumlords. They're looking to push their ideological agenda on these poor countries, and they can force them to adopt their policies because the poor countries have no choice. This is one subject where China is looking like the humanitarian and the West is looking like a bully. And here's one stark example coming out of this event. So a coalition of countries got together and agreed that they would provide $2.7 billion of loans to Senegal, one of the poorest countries in the world, for the sole purpose of helping Senegal reach its objective of hitting their target of 40% renewables in their country by 2030. So these poor people need food, education, and healthcare. And these countries come along and say, okay, we'll give you $2.7 billion. That sounds good, but we want you to use it to install solar panels. Do you think that the average Senegal citizen is worrying about climate change? I mean, the poverty level in Senegal is 47%. These people are not worried about solar panels. The West has become wealthy by using cheap fossil fuel energy for decades, but they're not letting the poor countries in Africa and other developed countries do the same. They're forcing them to resort to these stupid, expensive, unproven green energy technologies. This is how these slumlords keep the poor people in their place. Now, the people in these countries who take all these loans from the IMF and the World Bank, they have no say in the process. But what ends up happening is they end up paying for these loans through higher taxes and inflation. So the poor people are paying more taxes to pay these loans. So that tax money is not going back into developing their own countries. It's going to pay off debt that they never negotiated for. But at this point, these countries are stuck. And so they never managed to really get ahead. Debt is the most effective way of keeping people under control. Because if they don't keep their payments up, they're going to suffer dire consequences. A good example of this is Pakistan. Pakistan to raise taxes in final attempt to secure IMF loan. This is what the IMF does. They give countries loans that they cannot repay back, at least not without a lot of struggle. And so these countries, in order to keep up with the loan payments, they have to go back to the IMF to ask for more loans. And that's when the IMF has you. Oppressive restrictions and requirements in order to get that loan. Things like, we require you to raise the taxes on your people. We require you to install X amount of solar panels. So this is how these evil people at the World Bank and the IMF insinuate themselves into the governance of other countries. They force them to adopt policies that they otherwise would not adopt. So I'm going to show you a little montage here of clips out of the summit. And this is one big PR campaign to convince us that everything that they're doing, all this money that they're pouring into poor countries to address poverty, bullshit, and climate change. But they don't really believe it. I don't think these people really believe in climate change.
What is required of us now is absolute transformation and not reform of our institutions. And that transformation is required because while the world knew since the 1890s that we were facing the warming of the climate, we chose not to heed the advice of scientists.
In a world where the fight against poverty and climate change are interlocked, we face an urgent challenge. As our planet continues to warm, the most vulnerable populations bear the heaviest burden, facing intense droughts, storms, and floods, making it even harder to escape poverty and lead safe and prosperous lives, while also tackling the climate challenge. Over the past 6 years, we have tripled our financing for climate action. We have gone from green projects to greening entire economies.
Well, we know that there are, among the more ambitious proposals, there are some that we hear from Macron, for example, for things like global taxation of carbon emissions.
But let's be clear, this cabal that got together in Paris a couple of days ago and is very widely attended was a demonstration of the evil and arrogance of these people. And they package it in a beautiful little package called Addressing Poverty and Climate Change. That's not what this is about. This is about control. If they're actually being humanitarian, they would do things like help these countries restructure their old debt so that they can breathe a sigh of relief a little bit, make their payments a little bit easier on their other debt. So this is another example of how you cannot trust the headline mainstream media. This was a PR event put on by the globalists to help make this bad medicine go down easier. I think this is a disgraceful event, and anybody who's willing to look past the headlines a little bit, you're going to be just as disgusted as I am. But this is who these people are. These people don't give any money away for humanitarian purposes, okay? All right, so that's my little report for the day.
All right, I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this or you're listening to this, please leave a comment. We want to know what your thoughts are on this. I don't want to use their terminology. I don't want to say climate change because it's not change. It's all bullshit. As soon as I do that, I'm being drawn into their narrative and say that, you know. But what are your views on this topic and this subject? Because it's an important subject. There's no doubt about it. You know, sometimes in life, Ed, there's parallels that you could draw. There's, you know, I could say to you that driving a car is not really that much different to flying a plane. Flying a plane is actually really easy because there's nothing to run into in the sky, right? Taking off and landing takes a little bit of effort and talking on a radio, but you can build on those skills. So I can draw some parallels to say that if you can drive a car and you're competent, you could probably fly a plane. If you could say that climate change was associated with pollution and man's impact on planet Earth with all the pollution is causing climate change, I could see how you could join those dots. Even though I don't agree with that, I could see how there's parallels there. And there's many parallels that we could draw in life. But one parallel you cannot draw in life, and why I was laughing so hard during that report that you put there, is you can't say that climate change is associated with poverty. You can't. Those two things are not two sides of the same coin. They're two completely separate issues. That's like saying oil and water are the same things. That's like saying wind and solar are the same things. No, they both can create energy and they both can help you, but they're not the same. The way that I make a solar panel is not the same way as I make a wind turbine. So them joining the dots of climate change is tied to poverty is simply not true. Because before the Industrial Revolution that we've all experienced in the last 150 years, 200 years, before the Industrial Revolution, everybody was poor. And your life expectancy was like 42 as a guy or some shit like that. You know, the chances of, there was a 50% chance that your kid made it to 18 years old. And when they made it to 18 years old, there was like a 20% chance that they made it to 20 years old. You know, and statistically, you were likely to die much, much earlier. Our life expectancy now is like 2 times what it was 200 years ago. And that's because of the modern society that we live in. Human beings just had always lived in the natural world. It's only in the last couple of 100 years that we've moved to where we are today and live in the luxuries that we have today. So I think it's just such a long bow to draw, man, to do those things. And even that woman from Barbados, she's like laughing as she's talking. She's got a smirk on her face as because she doesn't believe what it is that she's actually saying. I don't know. What are you thinking, Ed?
Yeah, okay, so there are many angles to this story, right? Let's just start with, and I want to hear people disagree with me because I know this is not a popular opinion. There aren't many of us who believe this, that this is all a con, this is all a hoax. Okay, this whole business, this whole prediction of global warming comes from computer models. The models are only as good as the data you put into it. You know,
hold on. Let me pull on that thread with real people for a second. That each and every one of us on planet Earth, it doesn't matter where you live, whether you live in Senegal and you're below the poverty line and part of that 47% that you mentioned there, or you live in Minnesota where you do and you're affluent and you're happy and comfortable. All of us have seen a weather report, yeah? So let me just use my knowledge of aviation here. When you read the weather, so you get the data and you read the weather, and it's like in, it's a language all of itself that you have to learn to read when you're reading aviation weather. You look at that and you correlate that data with a synoptic chart, high pressure, low pressure, because I might be flying from point A to point B in the morning, and then I need to wait there until late in the evening where they reload my plane and come back. And the weather forecast for the morning is correct. So it was put out, all of the sensors are at the aerodrome right now, and I look at it and I say, okay, that's what the weather is now at that airport, and the airport that I'm going to, that's the weather there. And in between, I'm seeing the updates along the way, the area forecast that's accurate. But in 12 hours time, it's different again. And the reports are updated every 3 hours, 6 hours, and 12 hours in aviation because they recognize that it changes. Now, put aviation aside because we need high frequency updates there so people like me that are inexperienced don't kill themselves because of a weather event, right? So that's the reason, so we can make decisions with the best near real-time information that we have. Put that aside for a sec. Everybody else is subjected to a weather forecast where there's a weatherman or a pretty girl on TV pointing at a map for you, telling you that it's going to be 18 degrees in Sydney today and it's going to be partly cloudy or something like that, right? But how far in advance does that weather forecast go? It only goes 5 days in advance. Yeah, you never see a weather forecast on TV bigger than 3 to 5 days. From the weather sensors that we have on the ground to predict weather, we can predict weather out to no further than 10 days. Yeah, and that's from real-time inputs of data, from atmospheric information coming in, real-time inputs. And the way the mathematics works, and I challenge people to push back on me here, but before you do that, go to YouTube and say, how does the Bureau of Meteorology in your country calculate the weather? And there's literally billions of inputs that they put into these things to give you a forecast. But even though they can give you a 10-day forecast, it's only accurate 50% of the time. That's why they give you a 5-day forecast, which is only accurate 80% of the time. But how many times have you looked at the weather before you went to a wedding or to an event or something like that, and it was supposed to be a sunny day, and you go out there and it's pissing down rain? They're wrong all the time. So to your point, all of climate change and global warming is based on computer modeling. But the computer modeling that we have for the real-time data that we use doesn't work. And in aviation, something as important as aviation, as flying airplanes where people's lives are at stake on the ground and in the sky, and their cargo and all the things that go with it, all the little baby aviation stuff that I do, you need near real-time updates to calculate what it is that you're going to do, to calculate your reactions. Now, even if I just kind of step up 4 or 5 levels from where I am in aviation to go to be an airline pilots are subjected to the same thing. If I'm going to fly from Sydney to Dubai, there's a whole range of weather forecasting things that these aviators need to do to actually, before they get going, that determines their flight plans. If there's a volcano that's gone off in Indonesia, or if there's, there's a headwind in the jet stream that is 150 kilometers an hour, we have to figure out where to get away from all of those things and to do all that. And we can't do that based on a model. But we're basing our entire economy on a computer model. Imagine if we said at the start of the year, okay, everyone that flies Boeing 777 ERs, here is your flight level and your block altitude here, because the modeling that we've done for the year across all of planet Earth is this. Here's where the jet streams are. Here's where the headwinds are. Here's where the tailwinds are. Here's where the volcanoes will go off. Here's where this is. Here's where that is. It's just preposterous for me to even suggest that. It's ludicrous that you would suggest something like that. But you want me to swallow that you know what's going to happen in the next 50 years in the climate. But you can't predict the weather out more than 5 days with any more than 75% to 80% accuracy. But you won't let me go flying unless I've got the weather forecast that's less than 3 hours old. My head is going to explode. If I take all the 1984 controlling shit away and all those conspiracy theories away, just the logic of this is fundamentally flawed. It's completely and totally flawed. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, look, I don't think these people actually believe it really. Listen, not only do they have the arrogance to tell us that they know what's going to happen in the future with climate change, but they also have the arrogance to say we can change it. We can change the weather. We can change. We can't change the fucking weather.
Hey, it used to be called global warming.
Yeah.
But in the 1970s, it was global cooling.
And there was acid rain.
Yeah,
and
the acid rain and the ozone layer and all
and
this
the ozone
garbage.
layer,
Right?
my favorite, the ozone layer.
Yeah, it's garbage, man. It's all garbage.
But this is, look, these politicians, I think most of them do not actually believe this. And proof of that is Barack Obama has 2 beachfront houses. The
biggest greenie on planet Earth doesn't park his house on a cliff there where he's going to get swamped by the ocean. Look, there's no doubt about it. There's things on planet Earth that are changing. You can't deny that. You can't deny that things are changing. There's more ice in Antarctica than ever.
Which has been happening since
exactly
the start of the Earth.
The genesis of life as we know it. NASA even came out in the last week. I don't know if you saw that report. NASA came out in the last week saying that climate change is not related to men. It's not related to man. It's related to the Earth getting closer and further away from the sun and precession.
And there are these inconvenient scientists who have done experiments with crops and things that the more that the carbon dioxide goes up, the better it is for the plants.
Well, that's what they pump inside of a greenhouse, man.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen those commercial greenhouses, they're pumping the CO2 in there. You go in there and you'll pass out because you can't breathe in there.
so maybe a solution is take all those farting cows that they're worried about and just
put them in the greenhouse.
There you go. Problem solved.
Hey, I found a video of a guy handing out flyers about climate change. So he's handing out flyers to people. And I think this video really typifies exactly what they're trying to force onto us. So this is a little bit of a piss take, but this is exactly how they're trying to force climate change upon you. So let's take a look. He smacks that guy, she takes 2. It's real, fuck yeah.
Typical liberal.
That's how they're trying to enforce climate change on you.
Yeah.
Right? Take it, believe it, or you get a kick up the ass. Yeah, take it. That guy's like, no, I'm a denier. I'll take one anyway. I think that really kind of typifies exactly how they're trying to force this down your throat.
Yeah.
Let me play a little video for you from the co-founder of Greenpeace and what he has to say about CO2. This is from, I think, just about 6 or 9 months ago. It's pretty recent.
The currency of life, and the most important building block for all life on Earth. All life is carbon-based, including our own. Surely the carbon cycle and its central role as the foundation of life should be taught to our children, rather than the demonization of CO2 that carbon is a pollutant. We know for a fact that CO2 is essential and that it must be at a certain level in the atmosphere for the survival of plants, which are the primary food for all the other species alive today. Should we not encourage our citizens, students, teachers, politicians, and other leaders to celebrate CO2 as the giver of life that it is? It is a proven fact that plants, including trees and all our food crops, are capable of growing much faster at higher levels of CO2 than present in the atmosphere today. Even at today's concentration of 400 parts per million, 0.04%, 0.04%, are relatively starved for nutrition. The optimum level of CO2 for plant growth is about 5 times higher, 2,000 parts per million. Yet the alarmists warn it is already too high. They must be challenged every day by every person who knows the truth in this matter. CO2 is the giver of life, and we should celebrate CO2 rather than denigrate it, as is the fashion today. We are witnessing the greening of the Earth, as higher levels of CO2, due to human emissions from the use of fossil fuels, promotes increased growth of plants around the world. This has been confirmed by scientists with CSIRO in Australia, in Germany in research forests, and in North America in wild forests. Only half of the CO2 we are emitting from the use of fossil fuels is showing up in the atmosphere. The balance is going somewhere else, and the best science says most of it is going into an increase in biomass of global plant life. What could be wrong with that as forests and agricultural crops become more productive?
Well, absolutely nothing
More
could be
CO2.
wrong with that at all.
More CO2.
Nothing. Build more coal-fired plants.
Yeah, more coal.
Dig more cobalt out of the ground with child slavery.
Yeah, more gas-powered cars. Get rid of those fucking electric, scam cars.
Look, I think the problem with this topic is that for every person like that guy comes along, the people on the left will try and shout you down.
Oh, yeah.
And the way that they shout you down is simply by saying to you that you're a climate denier.
Yeah.
So what that actually does is that brings me back to this graphic where you compare Corona and what happened in the last couple of years to climate. So if you were somebody that didn't want to inject experimental medicine into your body, then you were labeled what? An anti-vaxxer. Yeah. So you're labeled a climate denier if you don't believe that any of this is true. But the reality is the left, that's instead of calling you a racist, because they can't call you a racist about climate change, they'll call you a climate denier and they try and discredit you. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of atmospheric climate scientists that have come out in the last couple of years and said that everything that you're trying to do is based on a flawed model, which is you're basing all of these financial decisions off models. And then they'll say that there's been a worldwide consensus that climate change is real. Well, worldwide what? Worldwide from the United Nations, and there was 100 and something people in the United Nations that agreed that it was real. But all of those people that were there were funded by the United Nations to the tune of millions of dollars. So of course they're going to say it's real, otherwise their funding is going to go away.
Yep.
And it goes to the very heart of government censoring everybody about COVID and vaccinations, and the government's the arbiter of truth in all of these things. That's why this topic is so important, ladies and gentlemen. You might think, oh, fucking climate change. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. I just want to live my life and be left alone. No, you have to pay attention to this because this is the next way they're going to control you.
Yep.
They want to have a 15-minute city where you can walk anywhere that you need to in 15 minutes to get what you actually need to do. I actually live in a 15-minute city right now. But I can't really walk. I kind of can, but not quite.
Yeah,
like
but
I can't walk to the local hospital, but I could if I needed to, and it probably would only take me 15 minutes to walk there. But I can walk to the beach, I can walk to the shops, I can walk to all of the facilities everywhere I can go. But the difference is that they want to put a barrier there to stop me driving outside of those places. And that is like, if you want to come up with the concept of a 15-minute city based on public transport, I get it. That's actually a really good idea. I should be able to get on the train. And right now in Sydney, I can do that. Right now, the Sydney infrastructure is good enough for me to be able to do that. I can get on the train and within 15 minutes, I can access anything I could possibly need to live my life. Whether that was everything from the worst case scenario, like a medical problem at a hospital or a doctor or something like that, all the way to fun stuff, to go to watch a game of sport or to go to the movies or to go shopping or something like that. And most Western societies are already like that. You have buses, you have trains, you have trams, you have ways to access all of that stuff. All of this stuff that they're trying to do is just fucking bullshit. It's a way to control you.
It's a way to control you. Yeah, like I mentioned in my report, this is not about climate change. This is just a very convenient ruse that they can use to control you, because it affects everyone right on Earth. Global climate change, it affects everyone. So that's an easy one. So the worldwide flu, that was another thing for control, because it affected everyone in the world. So this is and this has been going on for years now, and a lot of money has been spent fighting this global climate nonsense. There's a lot of money. This scam. This is about money. This is about control. Okay, and this is and if they can convince you, if they can brainwash you, and it starts with the kids, right? Because they're the easiest ones to influence. They have the cartoons, Captain Planet. They start with the kids. So drilling this whole idea how climate change is real, and that if you don't do what we say, if you don't follow our prescribed solutions, then you're going to be dead, and your kids are going to be dead. So this is a scare tactic, and this is the way.
And the government's going to keep you safe, though.
Yeah, it's for your own good, right? Everything's always for your own good. If you don't, you're going to
die. You will die. Your children, your grandmother will die. But we'll keep you safe. Don't worry. Just do what we say. Stand in there. Will you?
Yeah, but if you look at the facts, if you look at the way if you follow the money in this program, why if they truly want to fight poverty, if they think that global warming is going to fight poverty in the third world countries, then these loans should be structured that way. Give these people some relief so they can do their climate change program.
It's a long bow to draw. It's a long bow to draw that climate change is associated with poverty. You can't say that, because there's been thousands of studies about why people are poor. We're having that conversation here in Australia in the public forum right now about the voice to Parliament, where the people on the yes side of it saying that Aboriginals should have a voice to Parliament and have a say on everything that goes on in this country, outside of what everybody else gets to say. What they're trying to do is they're trying to join the dots to say that Aboriginal people are underprivileged, therefore they should have more rights than some other people here in Australia, and they should have a say on the policies made by the government because they're so underprivileged. But the reality is, your level of poverty and underprivilege is only associated with your location and your level of education and your parental upbringing. Mm-hmm. So it's been very closely documented in many parts of the world that just because you were born into a poor Aboriginal community in far northwestern Australia doesn't mean that you can't become one of the world's biggest and most wealthy business owners. There's no reason why you can't do that. You live in a country where you have the same opportunities as everybody else to go and get an education, to go and put yourself out there and have a go at things, and to create the opportunity for yourself. And it doesn't matter if you're from far northwestern Australia, you're from Nigeria, or you're from the deserts of Sudan. If you really were determined to get out of the problem that you were in, you would move your location to a place where you would create new opportunity for yourself. So there's no possible way that you can join the dots between climate change and poverty. It's impossible. You can't join the dots. But that's exactly what they're doing. I've got one more video here, and I'll just close that thought and let you finish your thought there, and then I'll play that video from the evil dragon lady herself. So what are your thoughts on poverty and location there?
Well, yeah, there's I was trying to think of who said this. I think it's Ben Shapiro or someone, and I totally buy it, that there are three things that everyone can do to almost guarantee that you will not be in poverty. The first one is graduate from high school, get through high school. Number two, don't have any children until you're married.
Yep.
And number three, get some kind of a basic job.
Dead simple.
You do those three things, you're almost guaranteed not to be in poverty.
How are you going to get us cancelled?
I'll wear it as a badge of honor.
You're speaking far right, white supremacist conservative values. Yeah, let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at this far left freak and give you the contrast.
Affects inflation, and inflation is the beast that all central banks.
How the fuck does climate change affect inflation? The only thing that affects inflation is the IMF printing too much money.
I fucking hate this woman so much.
You never cuss about anything except this lady.
Oh, yeah.
They wear a green jacket or not, want to tame and discipline. Number two, because it affects our balance sheet. Whether it's a 3 trillion.
Hold on, I just thought of something when she said climate change affects inflation. It actually does, for the reasons that you talked about, Ed, where they use debt trap diplomacy to release money. So the IMF and the World Bank will give these countries the money and the loans that they need, but only on the condition that they actually give, that they spend that money on those green projects. So the IMF and the World Bank are printing more money to give to these countries to tip into green projects. And the more money they print, the more inflation it actually creates. So that is actually true, what she's saying. But climate change itself, and there being more ice in Antarctica and less ice in the Arctic in summer, has nothing to do with inflation.
They're going to these poor countries, and these are slumlords. They say, yeah, we'll give you more money, but a portion of it has to go toward global warming.
Well, they've taken a leaf out of the WHO's book, Ed.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the WHO supply these African nations with gazillions of dollars to fund their health departments and their health systems. And in the process of doing that, so it's well documented. It's documented by RFK in his book called The Real Anthony Fauci, where he talks about how what the WHO do is they say, yeah, we'll release $1 billion worth of funding for your health system, but you need to vaccinate your population for this particular thing up to this particular percentage level. And it's usually above 95%. And so the government goes away, buys trillions of dollars worth of vaccinations across the whole African continent, vaccinates millions of people for things that they simply don't need because these problems don't exist and the vaccinations don't work anyway. And then they release the money and give it to them. And then in order for them to forgive the loans or to get more money, they have to vaccinate more of their population with the next big thing that they come up with. And the IMF and the World Bank are doing exactly the same thing here. Yep. And I think she's quite right when it says it creates inflation, but not for the reasons that she's perpetuating.
Correct.
Yeah. It is an absolute travesty.
This is a man-made issue.
It's a self-inflicted wound.
Yep.
But it's, when people look at it, it's like it seems like a divisive topic because people know that pollution is a real thing. They know that they can go down the beach here in Cronulla and pick up plastic everywhere, and it's a mess. And pollution is a real thing, and it is.
It is and it isn't. Okay, finish your thought because I'll touch about.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so when I was a kid, growing up, whatever you watch TV shows or news shows, and there were movies. If you watch a movie set in the 1970s in like New York or LA, if you watch what's that show, that cop show, anyway, so and the cop is chasing the guy around, and New York is covered in smog. And LA is covered in smog, and they would have these smog alerts on a regular basis. They don't have that anymore.
It's gone.
The air pollution has largely been conquered. Okay, in the developed world, we have conquered air pollution. Water pollution. Back then, you would have chemical spills and all sorts of crap in our water. The East River in New York, one of the most polluted, rivers in the world that runs, down there, along Manhattan Island. Well, now the fish are coming back. The whales are starting to come in. So that problem has largely been addressed. Okay, so and that, by the way, was mostly because a little bit was EPA stuff, which was always good, but most of it was private industry. It was like a competition. Municipalities knew that if they wanted to keep people living in their area, they would clean up their environment because they had a self-interest to do it. So pollution, we got a long way to solving pollution. There's always something more to do.
You're quite right, because I can't go to McDonald's now and get a plastic straw anymore. It's a paper straw. I can't go to the supermarket and buy a bag anymore. They're actually getting rid of all bags from supermarkets here in Australia because they got rid of the free plastic bags that they used to give to you. Then you had to pay for them, and now they're getting rid of the paid plastic bags, and now they only give you a paper bag. And so you're quite right. When you think of the scale of like a supermarket and everybody buying groceries every week like that is a self-fulfilling prophecy and a really good thing. It's a bit inconvenient or a pain in the ass or something like that, but industry has stamped that out because society has said, hey, maybe we shouldn't be using this, and this is a really good thing. And you think of all of the recycling we have in society, all of the tires that get recycled and turned into flooring.
Which is bullshit, by the way.
No, there's a lot of good recycling.
This is really pet peeve for me. This is when we come up with our list of pet peeves. One day we're going to do an episode with our pet peeve. This is one of mine. Is the big recycling scam.
We used to put our recycling onto a ship and send it over to Indonesia.
which they sweep in.
Which they sweep into the ocean. Fuck this. What are we going to do with it? Just fucking put it in the ocean.
It's all Australian waste. I could have done it myself, save money. That's the thing with the recycling scam. About 80% of the stuff that we put in our recycling bins end up in the landfill.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that type of recycling. I'm talking about there's a lot of recycling that happens through our society because of commerce. And people see opportunities.
Sure. Yeah.
So the tires one is the example that I can think of where, there's thousands of tires discarded every day, and someone goes along and collects all of those things and turns it into flooring products or insulation-based products and things like
that's
that.
innovation. That's
Yes.
capitalism.
Yes,
That's capitalism.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot of things that you buy that you will see that are made from 80% recycled products or whatever that might be, based on innovation. But largely what we throw into our bin just ends up in landfill.
Yeah.
And that's a well-documented fact that that type of recycling is largely bullshit. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm agreeing with your point that we've conquered a lot of things. We've conquered a lot of things because nobody wants to live in a polluted environment.
Yeah.
And I would agree with the greenies that are out there saying that it's a good idea to continue to try and do that, to try and make life better, to try and recycle, to reuse, to not be such a heavy consumer of things. I personally am like that. Often you'll go to the supermarket or you'll be somewhere and they'll say to you, do you need a bag for that? And I'm like, not really. Or I've got something with me and I'll just put it in here. Like, I don't need another bag.
Why can't they take a couple $1 billion of this money that they're wasting on programs that aren't going to move the needle at all? And go, why don't they take a couple $1 billion and build a couple of really good big ships that will go down to the Pacific there and just like troll around that little area that collects all those, where all the plastic is caught, and just scoop it all up and then chop it up in little pieces and take it to Sherman and dispose. Why can't they do that? I mean,
because it's not about the environment, because it's not about recycling. It's not about any of that. And your compliance with all of this greenie bullshit is the same as your compliance with COVID. Everybody, I can remember people saying, just go and get vaccinated because the sooner you do that, the sooner life can go back to normal. No, dickhead, the sooner you do that, the reason life won't go back to normal is because you're doing that. And that's why I think that this is such an important topic and such a really important thing to be talking about. You hear in Australia, just in the last 12 months, we had some really severe flooding down in the southern part of Australia in Victoria. And the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, came out and said that the flooding was caused because of climate change. He actually said those words. And I Googled it just as we've been talking to make sure I have said that right. But we have the Ministry of Truth here in Australia, and the Ministry of Truth that we talked about on yesterday's show, they're the ones that actually are going to say whether this climate change stuff is real or not. But if the Prime Minister comes out and says that the floods in Victoria are as a result of global warming and climate change, is he going to be stamped out and fined $3 million? Or are the news outlets that report that on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Reddit, on Channel 9, on Channel 7, are they going to be fined $3 million because the Prime Minister says that the firefighting season or the bushfire season is going to be more intense because of climate change and global warming? It's misinformation. And it's disinformation because there's no possible way that you can join the dots between that bushfire that's happening right now or that flood that's happening right now and global warming. You simply cannot join the dots. And I don't care what anybody says, what any scientist says, there's no way that you can conclusively prove that bushfire was caused by climate change or that flood was either. But the government here in Australia will stamp you out and fine a social media company that says what I just said. So I'm on YouTube right now saying that there's no way that you can prove that that's the case. So now, by their rationale and their reasoning, they could use somebody to go to YouTube and say, hey, this Rob guy is outside of your terms and conditions and he's denying climate change. But I'm perpetuating a lie. I'm perpetuating dangerous mis and disinformation because you're trying to keep somebody safe. So the rules that they're trying to use for censorship have got nothing to do with safety, because me saying that bushfire is not caused by global warming doesn't harm anybody. It doesn't hurt anybody. And even if it's not true, even if it is true, it doesn't matter. True or not, it doesn't harm anybody, and you're not keeping anybody safe from the fictitious and notional monster at the door. I don't know what they're trying to keep you safe from. And it's, to your point, Ed, it's not about climate change. It's not about saving the planet. It's not about global warming. And the reality is they're trying to silence anybody that doesn't agree with them. And they're using laws, legislations, fines, and they're not using a stick. They're using a hammer to actually do that with you. It's like unbelievable, man.
You can't control the weather.
Here's my graphic.
I'm sorry.
You cannot predict the weather, but climate change is all worked out on models. None of the models work. And you know, there's been a lot of, the funny thing is the people on the left will call them climate change deniers and they'll try and debunk any theory. But the problem with it is like you're trying to minimize the work that somebody's doing. Because if I take your model, your climate model, the model that you've got, and I input the backtesting data, same as I input backtesting data in a trading platform, if I take the data that I've had, the best information that I have, and I input it into your systems, what is the result that I come up with today? Because I know the results are today. And in every scenario, in every single scenario, and there's 130 something climate models that are out there, it's failed.
Well, listen,
and you simply cannot predict the weather. You can't.
They don't want any debate. They don't allow any debate. As far as they're concerned, this is settled science, right? They talk about global warming and climate change as a settled issue. It's settled. Everyone agrees. Everyone agrees.
But it's not. That's
of course it's not.
That's the ridiculousness of it. Hey,
this is the mind melding that these PR events do for people. That's what these PR events are mostly about. It's about conditioning people to all agree. Because if they hear it enough, I don't know, I'm sure there's a psychological term to it, right? If you hear the same thing over and over again, this is how minds are controlled.
Yep. 100%. You know, and it goes to the very heart of that thing that you talk about all the time. I say that you can't control somebody's mind. That's why communism doesn't work. And you're like, bullshit, Rob, you can control somebody's mind. They do that all the time. It happens all the time. And here it's, for some reason, the collective consciousness believes that this is actually going on. They believe that this is a real thing. And it's just such a strange thing, man. It's so strange for me to see this unfolding. And part of the issue that we face is that for decades and decades and decades, there's been these greeny activist people that have been perpetuating what it is that is going to destroy us all. First, it was global cooling, then it was the ozone layer, then it was all of that. And it reminds me of this tweet that came out just the other day from none other than the top scientist in the world, Greta Thunberg. So she says in June 21 of 2018, 5 years ago, 5 years and like 10 days ago, a top climate scientist is warning that climate change will wipe out all of humanity unless we stop using fossil fuels over the next 5 years. And she links to that post. So that date has come and gone, and climate change hasn't wiped out humanity. Henny penny, the sky is not falling. It's not falling. It's never falling, and it never has fallen, and it's not going to fall. The whole thing is a trap. The whole thing. It's all a ruse to get you to be controlled and comply with the next level of what it is that they've got. It is crazy.
I've got a serious question for you. So, what do you think that guy is going to be like? Is he going to end up dating Greta Thunberg? Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
That's a deadly serious question, man. She's probably part of the child sex trafficking cult, man. That's going to be about to be exposed by Mel Gibson or some shit like that. I'm calling it here. All right, let's take a little break and we'll close out this show. We'll be right back. In this crazy, uncertain world, we all need a way to protect and insulate ourselves from the outside forces that we simply cannot control. I'm a news junkie, and after a lifetime of constantly immersing myself in the darkness and the despair that engulfs the world, the path to shield myself and my family has become crystal clear. I want to invite you to come and join me in the Unspoken Truth community, where I'll show you how I protect my family from this crazy world. You'll get access to 3 masterclasses worth over $1,000, as well as our live events, training, and community of truthers just like you. Come on over to the unspokentruth.com.au and join us for just 50 cents a day. What are you waiting for? Get started now at the unspokentruth.com.au. All right, here in Australia, you may not know, for the Aussies watching this, you will definitely know this. Don't buy into the green bullshit that the Labor Party are selling you. It's a trap. You know, we need 22,000 solar panels per day. And is this me restating the deep state and the mainstream narrative that's trying to push back against this? No, these are just the facts. We need 22,000 solar panels per day installed for the next 7 or 8 years. Plus, we need 30 or 40 wind turbines installed every month for the next couple of years. And then we need 10,000 kilometers of power transmission lines to actually connect it all up. And you mentioned in your report that they're trying to use proven technology, proven green technology. And I just wanted to look at the language that you use. So green technology has proven consistently time and again not to work.
Correct.
And I don't mean not when the wind is blowing or when the sun is shining, but whenever green technology has been rolled out into an electricity grid at scale, all it has done is forced up prices.
Yes.
So prices have always increased under green technology whenever it's been rolled out. But we're doing the same thing here in Australia, and you're doing that in the United States as well. It's another self-inflicted wound that is actually going to destroy us.
Yes.
So we discussed this a couple of weeks ago, but I think it's worth raising again. But there was a fella from the electricity industry here in Australia that came out and was on one of the news reports saying that we need 10,000 kilometers of power lines in order to connect up all of these green projects and to do all of these things. So he said that the fundamental error that the government's making is that, hey, he said, I work in this industry and build those things. You can only build between 400 and 500 kilometers of that per year. And so if you take 10,000 divided by 500 kilometers at the optimistic end of the scale, you come up with 20 years. It's going to take you 20 years to build it all, but you're telling me that you're going to get to this target by 2030, which is only 7 years away. So once again, the government is feeding you this bullshit story that is just simply not true.
No.
And then on top of all of that, let me close the thought here. On top of all of that is that there's no possible way that by the time these projects have finished, so let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say by 2035, they hit their target. They only overran it by 5 years. We got to where we want to be. It's all installed. What happens in 2050? Because in 2050, all of those things
they've got to replace them all. Yeah,
exactly. But no one's talking about that. And so these are some of the biggest projects that have ever been undertaken by any country on planet Earth, and we produce less than 1% of the world's fossil fuel emissions. Less than 1%. But the amount of money that's going to cost the economy and the destruction it wrought on households on a daily basis because of the cost of energy prices, we have a prediction here in Australia that energy prices are going to go up by as much as 30% in the next couple of months. In the next 3 to 6 months, they'll go up by 30%. So if your bill is $10,000 a year, you're going to be paying 30% more for that. So what does that actually mean to business? Well, it means that consumers are going to be faced with carrying the cost of those additional bills. So if everything is costing more, isn't the government driving more inflation into the economy with this idea of green energy? It just doesn't make any sense.
Of course. Now, of course, the way they sell it is, but the alternative, if we don't do this, it's going to be even worse, right? That's the message. That's how they sell this.
But this is the bullshit. That's the bullshit right
there.
It
is bullshit.
Because they say the temperature will increase by 1.5 degrees. So this is where all of the language and the nomenclature really starts to become important, right?
Yeah.
Because they used to talk about global warming. And whenever there's a bushfire, the Prime Minister gets on TV because he's a fucking imbecile and says that the bushfire is caused by global warming, even though there's no way that you can join those dots. It's impossible for any human on planet Earth to say that that bushfire was definitively caused by global. No, it wasn't. It was caused by a lightning strike. And the lightning strike comes from rain clouds. Is there more rain clouds because of global warming? But here in Australia in the last month, we've had the coldest spring and coming into winter in 30-something years. I think it was like 37 years. But I don't hear any greenie or climate change person saying, oh, this cold weather is because of climate change. The snow in Victoria is because of climate change. But the bushfires are, but the snow's not. But the bushfires are, but the snow's not. It just, the whole thing is fake. The whole idea of climate change is fake.
You know, at this meeting in Paris last week, there is not one dissenting voice challenging the idea.
And no one pushing back. Yeah, it's just an echo chamber of bullshit. Yeah.
Because that's their agenda is about the money. It's about the money and the money and the money. That's what this is about. It's about the money and it's about control. It's so the poor countries, even if you have a leader of a third world country showing up at that event, he's not going to challenge them on the idea of because he wants some money, right? So he doesn't want to rock the boat.
Exactly.
And talk about hypocrisy. Where are all of these environmentalists talking about these toxic solar panels that end up in landfills because they're not recyclable? Okay, these solar panels are not recyclable. They end up in landfills, and the toxic material ends up leaching into your water supply. Where are the environmentalists? These propellers that make up these bird blenders called wind
turbines.
tunnels. Yeah, they are not recyclable. And that material is made up of toxic, and they all end up in the landfill. And those turbines, they last for like 5 years, 6 years.
So I've got a video that explains all of that really succinctly for people. So if you're not familiar with this topic or this conversation, you need to start getting familiar with it, because this is the next way that they're attempting to control you. So this lady is just at a town meeting. She's nobody important. She's not a scientist or anything like that. She's just somebody that's used a brain and a critical thinking to put some content together. So take a look.
I've been a supporter of green energy and a keen environmentalist since my 20s. My office is solar powered, so I was mortified to discover that a single lithium mine causes millions of tons of waste every year, laced with sulfuric acid and radioactive uranium, polluting the water supply for 300 years, not to mention the unacceptable human costs with child labour to mine cobalt. When I researched which solar panel to purchase, I did not for 1 minute consider it would be made by people trapped in razor wire enclosed labour camps, being exposed to large quantities of quartz dust which causes silicosis. Please note that the Ethical Consumer Organisation report that it is hard to avoid forced labour in the solar panel supply chain. Wind turbines, which last about 20 years, consume a colossal amount of resources and energy to manufacture and install, not to mention the blight and bird kill. They require diesel engines to start them up and then gallons of oil to lubricate, and they can't readily be recycled. Solar panels are also extremely difficult to recycle, costing more than the production of the panel. And lithium batteries pose steep challenges too. Add to that the human suffering, which we've all unwittingly been part of just by owning a laptop or mobile phone, which is minimal compared to what's required for an EV or solar farm. These so-called green or ethical solutions aren't solutions at all. Just very good marketing from the $1.5 trillion a year climate change industry. That's $4 billion a day, by the way. None of us can undo what's already been done, but what we can all do is make sure this doesn't escalate exponentially with fleets of unnecessary EVs and acres of solar farms eating up our precious farmland.
I think she summed it up really succinctly there. She put the whole topic into just like 2 minutes there. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I'm $4 billion a day, man.
Just imagine the people you could feed with that.
Well, you could solve world poverty. You could solve thousands of problems. Imagine if you just took $4 billion a day and turned it inwards to your energy projects to figure out a way to make solar panels not 20% efficient, but 99% efficient.
No, fuck the.
No. What I'm saying is using existing technology to improve what we've already got.
Oh man, did you just listen?
Did I open the door there?
Yes. Solar panels have been around since I was a kid.
Yeah, they've never worked properly, right? So they've only got that efficiency of about 20%. So what I'm saying to you is, if they took $4 billion and invested that into the world's smartest people, you could come up with a better way of actually doing it.
There you go. How about an alternative? How about this hydrogen stuff that you've been talking about? There are other technologies that are not being allowed to be developed.
There's already technology that works, and we know works at scale.
There you go.
Nuclear works at scale, coal works at scale, gas works at scale. All of those things work at scale. So if we can agree that what we've already got is working, why is there a need to come up with something new? That the whole, and it all comes back to that one age-old adage, doesn't it? And you kind of started out where we're ending up here is you just got to follow the money, and it's literally got nothing to do with climate change. It's got to do with debt trap diplomacy. And the people that are creating the debt are the ones that are perpetuating the poverty in the world, because as they perpetuate that debt, give the country the loan for them to invest into some fictitious imaginary green project, which creates inflation, which creates more taxes in that country, and it creates no ability for that country to pay it back. So I've got a project that I don't need. I'm weighed down with a white elephant, and that white elephant is costing me more money and it's causing more problems than it actually was meant to solve. It is a very, very, very strange thing that's happening. And I don't know how we can actually fight back against it, Ed. I don't know what we could do. There's a few sensible voices in parliaments around the world. In Australia, we've got, I don't know, maybe a dozen people in parliament that say, hey, this is complete garbage. None of it's true. People go up in front of Senate estimates all the time and get taken apart by these parliamentary members. But the policies overall are destroying the economies of our countries.
Yeah.
The green policies that you have there in the United States are the same as the green policies that we have here in Australia, which are the same as what's happening in other parts of the world. And they're self-inflicted wounds destroying the economy and undoing the very fabric of our society the only reason is to control you so you'll own nothing and be happy. You don't need a car, just rent a car. You don't need to have those things, just rent those things. And then just moving you towards a fundamental shift in the economy. And it's just a matter of time before we see you being limited by your carbon footprint, even though your carbon footprint actually only enhances the greening of planet Earth. The more carbon that I put out, the better it is for all the plant life on planet Earth. But they'll tell me that that's actually changing the weather. But they can't tell me why they can't predict the weather any more than 5 days in advance with any less than a 50% accuracy. And they can't tell me why I can't fly a plane today from the weather from last week based on the forecast that they gave last week. The whole thing is a lie. The whole thing is based on a lie, and your government is lying to you, and the green politicians are lying to you. Don't misconstrue, and I want to close out with this thought. Don't misconstrue climate change for pollution. I don't want pollution any more than anybody else. And I think to your point, Ed, that there's plenty of companies and people out in the world, they're doing their very best to minimize the pollution that they put out for a variety of different reasons. First of all, it's ethically a good idea. Second of all, it's good for business. And third, people just don't want to live in a dirty environment. So pollution is something that's been tackled really well in the Western world, maybe not so much in developing countries, but certainly in the Western world where you and I live, it's been tackled really well. Can it be better? Yes, it can always be better. But don't misconstrue pollution for climate change. They're two completely separate issues. And both of them have different things to be spoken about. Pollution is spoken about in one way, but climate change is spoken about in another way. It's impossible to control the weather. But the arrogance of the politicians in your country, doesn't matter where you are in the world, because it's all the agenda, the arrogance of them, they would think, and they will have you think, that they can control the weather with their pen. It's just not true.
So do not buy an electric car.
Don't.
If you have one, get rid of it. And go out and buy the biggest gas guzzling, fuel inefficient car you can, and
increase your footprint now. Get a diesel car.
Increase your carbon footprint for the trees.
I got a video to close it out here for us, Ed. You always talk about girls in bikinis by swimming pools.
I deny that.
That'll grow our channel.
I deny that.
I found a video of two girls from the World Bank. They're dancing by a swimming pool. Just let me turn the volume down there because it's a bit much. And then there's a picture of all of us not wanting, or an effigy of all of us not wanting to deal with their bullshit. And I think this is how they try to sell climate change to you. They try and sell it to you like it's something really fabulous, but I think it's all bullshit. So check it out. Let me play it again for fun. We're not having any of your climate change bullshit. We're just not going to have it anymore. We're not going to listen to it. We're not going to listen to your authoritarian control or your ability to try and shut us up or silence us. We're not having it. That's the unspoken truth. Ed, that was a hell of a fun episode, mate. What do you think?
Yeah, pretty good. It's about time we got around to that topic. Man, this this is affects everyone, and it's not going away soon. Yeah.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And, you know, every other day, it's something that it's a topic that I really like, because I love the science of weather, and, you know, that kind of came from learning to fly airplanes and just understanding the world around you and how it works and how it all interacts. And it's a fascinating subject to me. I'm a weather nerd from a long way back in relation to those things. So whenever I can learn some more about why this is all bullshit, I'll definitely be sharing that with the audience.
It's not about science, it's about the money.
That's what it's all about. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support here on The Unspoken Truth. Don't forget that we're available as a podcast. Pop open your favorite podcasting app, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Google Podcast, or wherever you get your audio content. You'll be able to get a copy of The Unspoken Truth in your ears. Don't forget to come on over and follow us on Twitter and Telegram. All of the links are right down below in the description. Let's wrap it up for today. Ed, have you got a final comment before we go, mate?
And God save the Queen.
God save the Queen. Bye, everyone. See you tomorrow.